living in dualities has become a rising trend lately. What do I mean by dualities? I've defined it as people that are living lives that could be completely independent, but they're living them simultaneously. So people that have one foot in two different paths. To give you some more concrete examples, we can look at the student athlete who's pursuing a career as a full-time student, who's trying to learn, get his education, get his degree, while he's also following a path of semi-professional athleticism and trying to be an athlete. We also have the corporate entrepreneur, the guy who goes to work at a job that he's not super excited about from 9 to 5. And then once it's over, he races home, and nights and weekends, he grinds away at his startup. He's living his full-time job life while simultaneously living his entrepreneurship life. And we've all been told that success takes a lot of hard work, which got me thinking, how can we expect to succeed when we're doing two things at the same time with only half of our effort? So to me, this is kind of a worrisome trend. And I think it's not a trend that we're really picking. I was thrust into dualities from the beginning of my life really without much of a choice. When I was 6 years old, my parents decided to move from northeastern France, where I was born, into the United States. But they forgot one slightly kind of important element. I didn't speak any English. So I was a social outcast from the beginning. Right? How can you be social when you don't speak the same language? When some people are speaking hamburgers and I'm talking baguettes and Chardonnay, right? It just doesn't work. I remember one very particular time when I was in elementary school where a boy walked up to me and he was holding a soccer ball and he said, "Hey, Kevin, do you want to play soccer with us?" And I'll give you some context as to why he approached me. Right? At this point in time, I was the king. Right? So I was a 6-year-old kid. I had done pretty well on a quiz, and I had gotten a piece of candy. I had a lollipop. And as a 6-year-old with candy, I was the king. So he walked up to me and he says, "Kevin, do you want to play soccer?" And I didn't know what the word soccer meant. Right? To me, it was football, growing up as a European. And the closest word that I knew was sucker, that lollipop that I had. So after he asked me, "Hey, Kevin, do you want to play soccer?" I looked at him dead in the eye and I said, "No. I would rather eat it." And the look of confusion on his face perfectly mimicked the confusion that I was feeling internally. Right? I was living two very separate lives with a foot in each. At home, I was speaking European languages, French and Finnish. I was raised with European values, customs, traditions. And then when I went to school, I ate hamburgers. I learned about U.S. history. I learned the Pledge of Allegiance. And I was being taught U.S. customs and values. And then a little while later, my parents ended up getting divorced. And I was fortunate in that I got to spend half the time with my father and half the time with my mother. And my mother very quickly then remarried my stepfather. And once again, I was thrust in a new duality, where my father had been a very high-achieving corporate man. He had done very well in school. He had gotten his master's. He had gotten an MBA of sorts. And then he had just ground and worked really hard to climb that corporate ladder extremely successfully. And then my stepdad was on the other side of the spectrum, equally successful, but in entrepreneurship and in starting his own company. And when I think about students and I think about career paths, the most obvious fork to me is the small company versus the big company, David versus Goliath. And here I was with a foot in each. I was listening to my father talk about the stresses and the highs and the lows of his corporate job, while I was listening to my stepfather watching his stresses about the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. And again, I was in a duality. I was never asked to be in any of these. It was a path that I was forced into, although very happily. So it was no matter to me, no surprise, that for the rest of my career so far, I would be living in dualities. It's how I grew up. It's what I knew. But as I started to talk to some more of my peers and to talk to others, I realized that they too were living in dualities. And that got me very interesting. Because I know not every single person in this room moved to another country in the language they didn't speak when they were 6. At least I don't think so. That would be statistically incredibly improbable. So why was everybody else living in a duality, especially millennials? And I realized that we're all being thrust into a duality that we didn't ask for, based off of the cultures and values that we're being taught. So I'm going to tell you a dream that I had when I was a kid. Some of you might find this familiar. I dreamed that I would go to school. I would work hard. I would do well. I would get good grades. Then I could go to a good university, maybe the University of Illinois. And then I could, again, work hard, get good grades. I could get a job at a big company, right? Security. I knew that paycheck would always come. And I could work hard. I could climb that corporate ladder. And then, eventually, I would find somebody that I could marry, start a family. And then the ultimate capstone, the pinnacle of this dream, I could go buy a house. And yes, it would have a white picket fence. You might recognize this dream as the American dream that we've all been raised with. The values and the cultures have all taught us that this is part of being an American. This is what it's all about. However, our generation has grown up in a very different time. Talk about doing well in school first. We've grown up with student debt skyrocketing out of control. Our degrees are 10 times more expensive than the previous generation. And then I go and I get a job at a big company, right, and I work hard at that company. I dedicate my career to that company, and they take care of me. They provide me my paycheck, my health insurance. They're going to take care of me if I'm loyal to them. But I grew up in the '08 recession. I grew up seeing people who had spent decades of their lives, had given them to these large corporations, and all of a sudden now, they were on the side of the streets, begging for money on the intersections of highways. Well, maybe I can still have that family. I can still find somebody that I love and marry and be with for the rest of my life. We can have all these kids, and all life will be rosy. But divorce has been rampant lately. Do I still believe in that? Well, maybe there's still the house, right? The ultimate culmination, that white picket fence that I really, really want. But I grew up during the housing market crash. I grew up seeing property after property after property foreclosed on. And these people having their homes literally ripped away from them. So I think with that understanding and with that upbringing and the events that have transpired recently, it's no wonder that entrepreneurship is super sexy right now. That we're all living in dualities. We all have one foot in this path of the American dream that the culture and the values have taught us to believe in. And then we have this other path in our own observations, in the things that we've seen. I think it's important for us to realize that if we really want to succeed, we can't succeed with a foot in each path. If success is hard work, then succeeding in two different things simultaneously is an infinitesimally amount of hard work. It can't be done, right? So when I started my first company as an entrepreneur, I thought I could be a student and I thought I could be an entrepreneur at the same time, right? Here I thought I would go and graduate with every honors in the book. I would even make up honors. That's how good of a student I would be. Oh yeah. And then I'd go and I'd be this rock star entrepreneur, right? The next Mark Zuckerberg posing on the cover of Time magazine. Right? I'd be in Forbes. I'd be in all those cool tech blogs that people talk about that some I know what they mean and some they don't. Oh boy, was I wrong. I was wrong big time. I very quickly realized that I couldn't do both. In the beginning, it was great. The company was starting to take off, and I was doing pretty well in school. But as soon as the startup took up a little bit more of my time, I was very quickly overstretched. And then I broke, and I wouldn't sleep at all. I'd sleep maybe a few hours a night. All my time would go to studying, and then in the evening, all my time would go to the startup. And it just wasn't healthy. It wasn't possible. I couldn't keep on growing both things at the same time. So I had to figure out, what am I going to do? And I didn't know. And I sought the advice of every friend I had in the book. It was all crap. None of it helped. And then eventually it hit me that, well, maybe what I want to do is inside me. Maybe I have the answer to what I want to do. Why does anybody else know what I want? That's kind of something personal, right? So I started to be a little more reflective, and I started to look inside. And I tried to figure out who I was. I looked inside, and I thought about student Kevin and entrepreneur Kevin, and which one I was more interested in. Right? Which one of me in the morning would hit the snooze button? And which one of me would get up excited and say, "Come on, world! Bring it on, I am here!" And very quickly I realized that was the entrepreneur in me. The student me was going, "Oh, I have a final, sleep." And the quintessential part when I realized I had to pick So I was traveling for work. I was at O'Hare. And for those of you that haven't flown through O'Hare recently, it is the busiest airport in the world right now. So it's a little bit noisy. And here I am sitting in the terminal. It's already very uncomfortable. I have my feet kind of awkwardly crossed. And I'm on my way to San Francisco for work. And I'm on the phone. I'm on the phone with a professor taking a midterm over the phone from O'Hare. Didn't go very well. But I realized at that point that either I am absolutely insane or something has to change. And every time that I thought about what I need to change, the same question came up. And that question was, well, what if I fail? What if I do what I want and I'm not good enough? What if I don't succeed? What if I fail? And that was very scary for me. So I didn't really act. Eventually, I flipped the question, which to me is what TEDx is all about. And instead of asking myself, what if I fail? I asked myself, what if I succeed? And that's when my entrepreneurial success started. That's when the user base went from tens of thousands to millions. That's when the company's valuation revenues went from tens of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars. That's when I found my success, when I asked myself, what if I am good enough? What if I can do it? What if what I know inside I want to do, what gets me up in the morning, is something that I can actually do? And to me, that was life-changing. And to me, that's the most important moment that I have ever had in my life. I think we're all living in dualities. I'm still living in dualities. I'm still a student here. But I changed one very major thing. Instead of being a student on this side and an entrepreneur on this side, I said, well, I know I want to be an entrepreneur. So how can I take what I'm learning in school, and instead of getting some boring old degree, how can I learn about what I want to do? It seems like such a simple concept, right? If I want to do something, why don't I learn how to do it? So I started taking classes that were more in like the marketing and the business management and accounting and things like that. And I started augmenting my engineering education with these other classes. So essentially what I did is I took the two paths I was walking down and I merged them into one. I found a focus. And I found a focus by asking myself one simple question. What if I succeed? Thank you.